Doing a daily Bible devotional has been the best thing that I've done for myself. My time in the Old Testament only proves to me again and again and again that the heart of man is deceitfully wicked above all things. When I'm reading the New Testament, I read it within the context of when Jesus said, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." Everything in the New Testament is just an expansion of one of those two thoughts. Those are the two lenses I look through when I'm reading the Old or the New Testament. So get a cup of coffee, sit back, and join me as I think with my mouth open. Greetings and salutations. Welcome to another day in the fabulous Lord's neighborhood. And welcome to another episode of Coffee, the Bible, and Paige. I am your caffeine-imbued host, Paige. Here's my coffee. And the choir sang, "In the beginning, coffee, and lo, it was very good." Today we're going to continue our little jaunt in 1 Samuel. We're up to chapter 26. Today we are going to read about David's last encounter with Saul, the king, and David is getting a little fed up. And we're going to see his frustration a little bit, and we'll chat about this thing or that thing and see where God takes us as we read through this. Let's get started. Chapter 26. The Ziphites went to Saul at Gibeah and said, "Is not David hiding on the hill of Hachilah, which faces Jeshimon?" So Saul went down to the desert of Ziph with 3,000 select Israelite troops to search there for David. Saul made his camp beside the road on the hill of Hachilah facing Jeshimon, but David stayed in the wilderness. When he saw that Saul had followed him there, he sent out scouts and learned that Saul had definitely arrived. David set out and went to the place where Saul had camped. He saw where Saul and Abner, son of Ner, the commander of the army, had laid down. Saul was lying inside the camp with the army encamped around him. David then asked Ahimelech the Hittite and Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, Joab's brother, "Who will go down into the camp with me to Saul?" "I'll go with you," said Abishai. Now, Abishai and Joab, they're David's nephews through his sister Zeruiah. Hope I got that name right. So David and Abishai went to the army by night, and there was Saul lying asleep inside the camp with his spear stuck in the ground near his head. Now Abner and his soldiers were lying around him. Abishai said to David, "Today God has delivered your enemy into your hands. Now let me pin him to the ground with one thrust of the spear. I won't strike him twice." Apparently, Abishai has a tendency to not be characterized by restraint. David is continually having to pull him back. We'll read about that when we get to 2 Samuel. But David said to Abishai, "Don't destroy him. Who can lay a hand on the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? As surely as the Lord lives," he said, "the Lord himself will strike him. Or his time will come and he will die, or he will go into battle and perish. But the Lord forbid that I should lay a hand on the Lord's anointed. Now get the spear and water jug that are near his head and let's go." Now the Lord is going to be the ultimate cause of Saul's death because vengeance belongs to God. And David is absolutely determined not to be the one that kills the king. And he wasn't going to let one of his servants kill the king. David was absolutely determined to let the Lord fight his battles for him. This is a difficult thing. I was talking with a friend of mine via Facebook the other day about how difficult this aspect is. When somebody is hurting you, when somebody is coming after you, somebody's persecuting you, you want to fight back. And it's a perfectly natural requirement for us to want, not a requirement, it's a perfectly natural thing to want to respond in kind when somebody's hurting you, when somebody's attacking you, to fight back. And it takes real restraint to let God fight for you. And that's what David's doing. David has a rather formidable fighting force of his own. Now, it wasn't 3,000 men, so I'm not sure how he would stand in a battle against Saul. But he was a warrior of some renown. And he could hold his own. And yet, he's restraining himself. He's determined not to touch Saul and let God deal with Saul. There's a lesson in there for us. This isn't easy for me. This isn't a natural response of my own. So I'm taking that away from all this. So David took the spear and water jug near Saul's head, and they left. No one saw or knew about it, nor did anyone wake up. They were all sleeping because the Lord had put them into a deep sleep. Now, that explains why they could go into the camp and not make an alarm. David crossed over to the other side and stood on top of the hill some distance away. There was a wide space between them. He called out to the army and to Abner, son of Ner. "Aren't you going to answer me, Abner?" Abner replied, "Who are you who calls to the king?" David said, now I want you to picture this. David is frustrated, and there's more than a little sarcasm here. "You're a man, aren't you? Who is like you in Israel? Why didn't you guard your lord the king? Someone came to destroy your lord the king. What you've done is not good. As surely as the Lord lives, you and your men must die because you did not guard your master, the Lord's anointed. Look around you. Where are the king's spear and water jug that were near his head?" Saul recognized David's voice, and he said, "Is that your voice, David, my son?" Interesting response from David. He replied, "Yes, it is, my lord, the king." A couple chapters ago, when he responded to Saul, when he talked to Saul, he called him my father. And he was a son-in-law to Saul. But Saul's given away his wife. David, in effect, is no longer his son-in-law. But David is also getting upset. And Saul had mentioned previously, a couple chapters ago, he finally admitted that David is going to be the next king of Israel. But Saul isn't giving up the kingdom to David, even though he recognizes David is the next king. And so David no longer responds to him with that kind of affection. I think the affection is over. The affection is gone. David replied simply, "Yes, it is, my lord the king." Why is my lord pursuing his servant? What have I done, and what wrong am I guilty of? Now you got to understand something here. They're shouting to each other across a gully or a ditch from a distance. Everybody gets to hear this interaction between Saul and David. Why is my lord pursuing his servant? What have I done, and what wrong am I guilty of? Now let my lord the king listen to his servant's words. If the Lord has incited you against me, then may he accept an offering. If, however, people have done it, in other words, are there people that are driving you to hunt me down? May they be cursed before the Lord. They have driven me today from my share in the Lord's inheritance and have said, 'Go serve other gods.'" David is the first time admitting verbally to Saul and to all who are listening that he knows that he is to be the next king of Israel, because that's his share in the Lord's inheritance. These people that are influencing you, Saul, are driving me away from my share in the Lord's inheritance and have said, "Go serve other gods." Now, do not let my blood fall to the ground far from the presence of the Lord. In other words, if I die, don't let me die away from my country, away from my people, away from my inheritance. The king of Israel has come out to look for a flea as one hunts a partridge in the mountains. Then Saul said, "I have sinned. Come back, David, my son, because you consider my life precious today. I will not try to harm you again. Surely I have acted like a fool and have been terribly wrong." "Here is a king's spear," David answered. "Let one of your young men come and get it." Now, Saul, you have to realize also, Saul is going insane. He's flipping from one extreme to another emotionally. One, he's so angry he's throwing spears at David, or throwing spears even at his son Jonathan. Another one, he's talking like this, like a normal repentant man. But David doubts Saul's sincerity. David knows that Saul could swing one way or the other, and he's not. He is not going to give Saul a chance with him. So that's why he says, here's a spear. Send one of your young men to get it. I'm not bringing it to you. The Lord rewards everyone for their righteousness and faithfulness. The Lord delivered you into my hands today, but I would not lay a hand on the Lord's anointed. David is absolutely telling Saul whose side God is on in this conflict between he and Saul. The Lord delivered you, King Saul, into my hands, but I didn't kill you. As surely as I valued your life today, so may the Lord value my life and deliver me from all trouble. Then Saul said to David, may you be blessed, David, my son. You will do great things and surely triumph. These are the words of someone who recognizes that there is an unchartable gulf between them. He's saying goodbye to David. And I don't know if you want to consider this a prophetic word or not, but this is someone who at some level is regretful of the way he is acting. That's my impression. You will do great things and surely triumphs. But Saul's behavior is erratic, and David trusts neither his confessions nor his blessings. So David went on his way, Saul returned home. And this is the last meeting between David and Saul. Strangely enough, Saul's final words to David are good wishes for his greatness and triumph. 3 times Saul has called David his son. And now Saul apparently knows that David is going to be his successor on Israel's throne. David had prayed that any potential enemies of his might be cursed. Saul now leaves David after praying that he might be blessed. There's nothing more to be said. David and Saul part, never to see each other again. The dance between Saul and David is over. And it's really sad to watch Saul descend into insanity, that's what's happening. You know, at the beginning it says God sent a harmful spirit, and he would just go into uncontrollable rages, and it's the earmarks of someone who's slowly going insane. And David and he are never going to meet again. They actually, it looks like they had a fairly close relationship. At least Saul was his father-in-law, for crying out loud. And Saul honored him when he defeated Goliath. David has had his moments with Saul, good and bad. But Saul, through his disobedience, has in effect lost the kingdom of Israel. But he's still king. Now there's a lesson in there too. Again, I spoke about this yesterday, I think, and throughout this series. Just because God tells you something's going to happen doesn't mean it's going to happen right away, right now. And just because God tells you something is going to happen is not the same as him telling you to go out and make that thing happen. The only example I have is in my life. God called me to ministry when I was 20 years old in boot camp, 1975. I was 19 years old. God said to me in that church service, and it was as if he was standing next to me speaking verbally to my ear. I heard him tell me, I have a ministry for you. Now, I thought I knew what that was. I thought I knew what that meant. I thought it was going to be a preacher or maybe a worship pastor, minister of music is what they called him in those days. And I pursued both of those vocations, thinking one or the other. And God, through a series of events, just absolutely slammed the doors shut on any of that. He was not calling me to be a minister of music. He was not calling me to be a pastor, not calling me to be any of those things. And I didn't know what it was he was calling me to do, but he was calling me into a ministry. And it wasn't until 2002 when I started teaching music to young people from the church and developed a business that supported my wife and I rather nicely since then, teaching music to the next generation of worshiper believers. And I never would have dreamed that that's what God had for me. And I never would have dreamed it would have taken so long, 20 some odd years. Why did it take so long? Was Page stubborn? Was he hard-headed? Is he just dense or thick? No, it wasn't that. We are hampered by time. We people, humanity is hampered by time. We live our life from moment to moment to moment to moment, minute to minute, hour to hour, day to day, month to month, year to year. And we don't know what the next minute, day, week, month, or year holds. But God is the author of our life. He's the author of our story. And if you picture a book, if you held a book in your hand, and let's pretend you wrote that book. This is a story you wrote. And you're holding that book in your hand as the author. You know beginning, middle, and end all at once. The characters in your story live their adventure one page at a time. And they don't know what the next page or chapter holds. They don't know what's at the end of the story. They only know what's happening in their now. That's us and God. He's written our story. We don't know what the next page holds. We don't know what's coming in the future. We only live in the now. But God, who's written our story, knows it all, beginning, middle, and end. It's all at once. It's as if he's holding our book, our life story in his hand. And it seems like a long time to us. For me, 20 some odd years, find out what my ministry was supposed to be. I didn't start into the ministry, if you want to call it that. I didn't start doing the ministry God called me to until 2002. So that would make me, 46 years old. I was 46 years old. And that was like 27 years after God told me he had ministry for me before I actually started in the ministry. Was that wasted time? No. God was preparing me. God was preparing my heart. He's preparing my mind. He was molding me into the image of his son. And whether it takes 20 years or 1,000 years, that's not my concern. My only requirement was to follow and pursue God and let him do what he's going to do when he's going to do it. David was promised by Samuel, via God, that he was going to be the next king of Israel when he was 12 or 13. He doesn't put the crown on until he's like 30-something. So all that time between age of 12 to 30, God is molding David. And it seems like a huge injustice what's going on with him and Saul. And on some levels, yes, there's injustice there because Saul is going insane and he wants to kill David. But God is going to make David king when God wants David to be king. Just because he told David you're going to be king didn't mean that he was going to be king the next day. Just because God told me he had ministry for me didn't mean that the ministry he had prepared for me was going to start the next day. In my case, it was 20 some odd years later. 27 years later. In David's case, it was about 18 years before he became king, from the time he was told he was going to become king. We can't judge God according to the calendar. We can't judge God according to the clock. His ways are not our ways. A day with the Lord is like 1,000 years to us. Time is immaterial to him. So we got to take that out of the equation. If God says something's going to happen, it will happen. When? Who knows? And who cares? God's going to do what God's going to do. And now I find myself, I'm 67 years old today, and all of a sudden, I have been doing this ministry for 21, 22 years. And in the world's eyes, it doesn't seem like much. But I have students scattered around the United States now, some of which are worship pastors in large churches, some who have become recording artists, some who have just learned to love God and become husbands and wives and working in the local churches. There's untold blessings coming out of the ministry that God has called me to that I had to wait 20 some odd years to start. David was called by God to be king. And God is molding him through this wilderness time to become the king of Israel that God wants for Israel. And I'm sure David was frustrated at times because he knew what God had said. But David was determined to let God deal with Saul. Let God deal with the details of how David was supposed to become king. He just lived from day to day. There's a lot there to think about, a lot to ponder. And a lot of it I'm still processing, to be honest. But I'm going to process away. Here's Paige. Here's my coffee. Folks, I'm out of here. Have a wonderful, glorious day. Bye-bye.
So, what did you think about today's Bible devotional? Email me and let me know your thoughts at ffog@me.com.